Marcus Thornfield laughed in my face at the country club charity auction, announcing to everyone that I was too broke to afford even the cheapest item, suggesting I leave before embarrassing myself further. 20 minutes later, when I stepped out of my custom Phantom Rolls-Royce and casually bid $2.3 million on the vintage Ferrari he'd been desperately trying to win, his laughter died in his throat as he realized the broke loser he'd just humiliated. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Owned the very investment firm that controlled his family's failing business empire. The crystal chandeliers of the Grandmont Country Club cast a golden glow over the annual charity auction, but nothing sparkled brighter than the look of absolute shock frozen on Marcus Thornfield's face. Just 30 minutes earlier, he had been the king of this room, chest puffed out, designer suit impeccable, surrounded by his usual circle of wealthy sycophants. Now he stood paralyzed, his champagne flute trembling, as I stepped away from my custom Phantom Rolls-Royce. The midnight blue paint job caught the evening light perfectly, and the hand-stitched leather interior had cost more than most people's houses. $2.3 million, I had said calmly into my phone, my voice cutting through the stunned silence. The 1967 Ferrari 275 GTB that Marcus had been desperately trying to win was now mine with a single phone call. The auctioneer's voice still echoed, "Sold to the lady who just arrived, Miss Alexandra Blackstone, of Blackstone Capital Management." Alexandra Blackstone, the mysterious billionaire who had built an empire from nothing. The woman whose investment decisions could make or break entire companies. The person Marcus Thornfield had just spent 20 minutes humiliating in front of the city's elite. But let me take you back to how this moment became possible. 6 months ago, I was standing in that same country club under very different circumstances. I wasn't the mysterious billionaire Alexandra Blackstone. I was Alex Stone, the poor scholarship kid who worked part-time at the club's valet service. At least, that's what everyone believed. The truth was far more complex. I had spent the better part of a year carefully constructing this identity of struggle and financial hardship. I had traded my custom-tailored suits for thrift store clothing, my penthouse apartment for a modest studio, my fleet of luxury cars for a beat-up Honda Civic. Why would someone worth $3.2 billion put themselves through such an elaborate charade? The answer lay in a conversation with my late grandmother, who had taught me everything about reading people. "Money reveals character, Alexandra," she had told me on her deathbed. "But poverty reveals truth. If you want to know who someone really is, watch how they treat the person they think can do nothing for them." So I had embarked on what my board considered complete insanity, a social experiment to infiltrate the world of the ultra-wealthy not as their peer, but as their servant. I wanted to see behind the masks they wore, to witness their raw attitudes when they thought they were among lesser people. For 6 months, I had watched Marcus operate, documenting his behavior while he remained completely oblivious to who I really was. Tonight he would learn the difference between wealth and character, and discover that the person you dismiss today might be the one holding your future tomorrow. I walked through the service entrance at exactly 6:47 p.m., dressed in my usual uniform, cheap black slacks and white shirt that screamed working class trying to look respectable. Every detail had been carefully crafted to signal my place in the social hierarchy. "Alex, thank God you're here," called out Jennifer Martinez, the event coordinator. "We're short-staffed tonight and Marcus Thornfield specifically requested you handle the VIP parking section." Of course he did. Over the past months, Marcus had developed a particular fondness for giving me the most demeaning tasks possible, taking genuine pleasure in watching me park cars and serve drinks while making condescending comments about knowing my place. I positioned myself in the VIP parking area just as Marcus's convoy arrived. He stepped out of his father's prized 1958 Rolls-Royce Silver Cloud, like a king emerging from his chariot, surrounded by his entourage. Robert Harrison, Patricia Vanderberg, and James Crawford, all equally corrupt and morally bankrupt. "Evening, Mr. Thornfield," I said with appropriate deference. "Beautiful car tonight, sir." Marcus barely glanced at me. "Yes, well, when you have taste and the means to afford it, Alex, you appreciate true luxury. Though I suppose that's not something everyone can understand." His friends chuckled on cue, and the humiliation continued throughout the evening. When I served drinks, Marcus sent back a perfectly prepared martini, claiming it was too warm while loudly discussing my apparent incompetence. Later, when I cleaned up spilled champagne, he tossed a $5 bill on the table. "For your trouble, Alex. I'm sure that's more than you usually see in tips." But the worst moment came when Marcus noticed me standing near the auction displays during a break. The centerpiece was a 1967 Ferrari, 275 GTB, estimated at $2.20 to $2.8 million. I was simply admiring the craftsmanship, but to Marcus my presence was offensive. "Alex," his voice cut across the room. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" "Just admiring the car, sir. It's beautiful." Marcus strode over, his face flushed with champagne and righteous indignation. "Admiring? Do you have any idea what you're looking at? This car costs more than you'll make in 10 lifetimes." The conversation around us died down as other guests turned to watch. Marcus relished the growing audience. "I mean really," Marcus continued, his voice growing louder, "what's the point of you standing here gawking at something you'll never ever be able to afford? It's like a homeless person window shopping at Tiffany's." He pulled out his phone, scrolling to photos of his garage filled with exotic cars. "This is my collection, combined value, about $15 million. Now tell everyone here about your car, Alex. What do you drive? Actually, let me guess, you probably take the bus." The silence stretched out. Marcus savored every second, his chest puffed with pride. His friends grinned, waiting for my response, for the final moment of humiliation. What none of them knew was that in exactly 7 minutes, everything they thought they understood about power and wealth was about to be turned upside down. I simply smiled and checked my watch. It was almost time. To understand the magnitude of what was about to unfold, you need to know who Alexandra Blackstone really was. At 28, I was worth $3.2 billion. Blackstone Capital Management controlled assets worth over $45 billion, with offices in New York, London, Hong Kong, and Dubai. Our decisions influenced global markets, and our investment choices could make or break entire industries. My penthouse occupied the entire 60th floor of the Meridian Tower, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic city views. The art collection alone was worth $50 million, original Picassos, a Van Gogh sketch, a Basquiat. My private garage housed 17 cars, including a 1955 Mercedes 300 SL Gullwing, a McLaren P1, and 3 Ferraris. But perhaps most importantly, I commanded respect. When I walked into a room as Alexandra Blackstone, conversations stopped. CEOs returned my calls within minutes. Government officials sought my counsel. I had built something that commanded genuine reverence from the most powerful people in the world. Creating Alex Stone had required systematically stripping away everything that defined my public identity. I donated my entire collection of custom suits, over $200,000 worth of haute couture, and replaced them with clothes from discount retailers. The apartment I rented was a 400-square-foot studio in Riverside Heights. The entire space could have fit inside my penthouse's master bathroom. But the most difficult part was psychological. I had to learn to walk differently, speak differently, carry myself like someone who had never known real power. Alexandra Blackstone commanded rooms through presence alone. Alex Stone had to learn to make herself invisible, to defer, to accept humiliation without the reflexive confidence that came from controlling billions. The 2008 Honda Civic I drove was perhaps the most expensive cheap car in history. I had paid $127,000 for it. Not because it was worth that much, but because of the extensive modifications. The exterior had been carefully weathered by movie set specialists, while hidden beneath was $85,000 worth of surveillance equipment. Cameras and recording devices captured every conversation, making the car a mobile intelligence operation disguised as transportation for the working poor. What Marcus didn't know was that Blackstone Capital had been quietly acquiring Thornfield Industries' debt for 3 months. We had used shell companies and strategic partnerships to gradually gain control of the company's financial obligations. By tonight, we effectively controlled 67% of Thornfield Industries' debt obligations. Marcus had no idea that the broke college kid he'd been humiliating held the power to either save or destroy everything his grandfather had built. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The beautiful irony was that his own behavior had sealed his fate. If he had shown basic human decency, I might have been generous. Instead, he had demonstrated exactly why his company was failing, and why his legacy deserved to end with him. As I stood there listening to Marcus detail his car collection, I felt calm certainty. Tonight wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice. And justice was sometimes best served from behind the wheel of a custom Phantom Rolls-Royce, by a woman who had earned every dollar of her fortune and every ounce of respect she commanded. The idea for this elaborate social experiment hadn't emerged from anger or revenge, it had been born from love and loss. My grandmother, Eleanor Blackstone, had passed away 14 months before that night at the country club, but her final words to me had fundamentally changed how I viewed wealth, power, and responsibility. Eleanor had been old-school wealthy, the kind of woman who had built her fortune during the feminist business revolution of the 1970s, when women had to be twice as good to get half the recognition. She'd started with a small investment firm and built it into a financial empire, but what made her remarkable wasn't the money she'd accumulated, it was the way she'd treated people during the journey. I remembered visiting her offices as a child, watching her know every employee's name, ask about their families, and ensure they had safe working conditions and advancement opportunities. When other firms were exploiting young professionals and underpaying women, Eleanor was creating mentorship programs, providing childcare, and breaking glass ceilings for an entire generation. "Money is a tool, Alexandra," she had told me during one of our final conversations, her voice weak but her eyes still sharp. "It can build or destroy, elevate or corrupt. But the real test of a woman isn't how much she accumulates, it's how she treats people when she thinks no one important is watching." She had paused then, her weathered hands gripping mine with surprising strength. "I've been watching you build your empire, and I'm proud of what you've accomplished. But I worry that you've become so focused on the game of wealth, that you've forgotten the human cost of playing it." Those words had haunted me long after the funeral. In the months following Eleanor's death, I had begun to notice things about my own behavior that made me uncomfortable. How quickly I dismissed people who couldn't advance my interests. How rarely I interacted with anyone outside my immediate circle of wealthy peers. How easily I had accepted that respect was something that came automatically with net worth, rather than something that had to be earned through character. The turning point came during a board meeting where we were discussing the acquisition of a smaller tech company. The founder was a brilliant engineer who had invented a revolutionary water purification system that could save millions of lives in developing countries. But her company was struggling financially, and she was desperate to find investors who would maintain her humanitarian mission. My board recommended against the acquisition, not because the technology wasn't valuable, but because the founder had refused to pivot toward more profitable military applications. "She's idealistic," my CFO had said dismissively. "Doesn't understand how business really works." I had agreed with the recommendation at the time, but something about the dismissive tone bothered me. Later, I looked up the founder, a woman named Sarah Chen who had grown up in rural China where lack of clean water had killed her younger brother. Her technology wasn't just a business opportunity, it was her life's mission to prevent other families from experiencing the loss she had endured. We passed on the investment, and 6 months later, Sarah's company went bankrupt. The technology was eventually acquired by a defense contractor that buried the humanitarian applications and focused exclusively on military use. An innovation that could have saved lives became another weapon of war, and the woman who had created it ended up working at an engineering firm, designing circuit boards for smartphone accessories. That night, I had stood alone in my penthouse, looking out over the city lights, and asked myself a question that Eleanor would have posed: what kind of leader was I becoming if I couldn't recognize the human value in people like Sarah Chen? The answer was deeply unsettling. I had become the kind of person my grandmother would have been ashamed of, someone who measured worth in dollars rather than character, who dismissed idealism as naivety, who had lost sight of the fundamental truth that money was supposed to serve humanity, not the other way around. So I made a decision that my board would have considered insanity, and my grandmother would have understood perfectly. I was going to strip away every marker of my wealth and status and experience the world as a normal person. The Grandmont Country Club was perfect. It was where Marcus Thornfield held court, representing everything I had grown to despise about inherited wealth. For 6 months, I would be just another person trying to make a living, just another target for people like Marcus's casual cruelty. And when it was over, I would use everything I learned to become the kind of leader my grandmother had been, someone who measured success, not by what she could take from the world, but by what she could give back to it. The process of becoming Alex Stone required me to systematically dismantle everything that made Alexandra Blackstone recognizable. For a woman whose movements were tracked by financial journalists, and whose decisions influenced stock prices, vanishing required careful orchestration. I announced an extended research sabbatical to my board, explaining that I would be studying emerging markets in developing countries where communication would be sporadic. The physical transformation was more challenging than I had anticipated. My personal trainer had spent 3 years sculpting my physique to project power and confidence, the kind of commanding presence that made investors feel secure about entrusting their money to my firm. But Alex Stone couldn't look like someone who had access to elite fitness facilities and personal nutritionists. I deliberately gained 12 pounds by switching from my carefully calibrated diet to typical working-class meals, fast food, convenience store snacks, cheap restaurants. The change was jarring. Where I had once consumed meticulously prepared meals designed to optimize energy and mental clarity, I was now eating processed foods that left me feeling sluggish. My skin lost its healthy glow, my energy levels dropped, and for the first time in years, I experienced what millions of people dealt with daily: the physical effects of economic limitations on health and wellness. My wardrobe transformation was equally dramatic. I donated my entire collection of designer clothing, over $300,000 worth of haute couture, custom suits and luxury accessories, to charity, and replaced them with clothes from discount retailers. The difference was immediately apparent. Where my usual clothing had been cut to enhance my natural authority and elegance, my new wardrobe seemed designed to make me invisible. The fabrics were cheap and uncomfortable, the fits were generic and unflattering, and the overall effect was to render me utterly forgettable. But the most difficult aspect of the transformation wasn't physical, it was psychological. I had to learn to think, speak, and carry myself like someone who had never known real power or wealth. This required studying behaviors and mannerisms that I had never needed to understand. I spent weeks in working-class neighborhoods, observing how women moved differently when they weren't accustomed to commanding attention. I noticed how they apologized more frequently, how they deferred to authority automatically, how they carried themselves with a subtle defensiveness that came from years of being dismissed or overlooked, especially as young women in service positions. Most challenging was learning to suppress the unconscious signals of confidence and authority that had become second nature to me. Alexandra Blackstone walked into rooms expecting to be the most important person present. Alex Stone needed to enter spaces, hoping not to be noticed at all. I practiced with acting coaches, people who specialized in helping wealthy individuals play working-class characters in films. They taught me to change my posture, to modulate my voice, to avoid the direct eye contact that had always been my signature. They showed me how to dress not just in cheaper clothes, but in clothes that suggested uncertainty about social norms, slightly mismatched colors, inappropriate formality for casual settings. The kind of mistakes that signaled someone trying hard, but lacking the cultural knowledge to get it exactly right. Alex Stone's fictional background required as much attention to detail as any major business acquisition. I established that Alex had grown up in a small town in Ohio, the daughter of a factory worker and a part-time seamstress. Her father had been laid off when the local manufacturing plant closed, leading to years of financial instability that forced the family to move frequently. This background explained Alex's work ethic, her gratitude for any opportunity, and her careful deference to authority figures. For education, I created transcripts showing Alex had attended community college sporadically while working various jobs to support her family. She had never completed a degree, but had taken enough business and accounting courses to explain her competence with basic financial tasks. The studio apartment I rented was a masterpiece of constructed poverty. Every detail told the story of someone trying to maintain dignity while struggling financially. The furniture was second-hand, the appliances barely functional, but there were small touches that suggested Alex's personality: library books on business and finance, a small collection of classic movies on DVD, and a meticulously maintained budget notebook. By the time I was ready to begin working at Grandmont, Alex Stone felt like a real person rather than a disguise. When Marcus Thornfield looked at me that first day, he saw exactly what I had worked so hard to create: someone he could safely dismiss, someone whose feelings didn't matter, someone who existed solely to serve his convenience. He had no idea that the humble woman parking his car controlled enough wealth to buy and sell his family's company a dozen times over. Walking through the employee entrance of the Grandmont Country Club on my first day as Alex Stone was like stepping into an alternate universe. The contrast between the opulent member areas I had occasionally visited as Alexandra Blackstone and the stark utilitarian staff quarters was jarring. While members enjoyed marble floors and crystal chandeliers, employees navigated concrete corridors and fluorescent lighting. The orientation session was conducted by Margaret Walsh, the head of staff services, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who had clearly perfected the art of managing dozens of young temporary employees. She sized me up with the practiced eye of someone who had seen countless college students cycle through these positions. "Alex Stone," she said, consulting her clipboard, "community college, part-time work experience. You'll start with valet and event support. Pay is $12 per hour plus tips when applicable. Show up on time, dress appropriately, and remember, members always come first." She handed me a uniform consisting of black slacks, a white button-down shirt, and a burgundy vest with the club's gold emblem. The fabric was cheap polyester that felt scratchy against my skin, a far cry from the silk and cashmere I was accustomed to wearing. But more than the physical discomfort, it was the psychological impact of putting on servants' clothing that truly struck me. Looking in the mirror of the employee bathroom, I barely recognized myself. The expensive styling had grown out into something more ordinary, my skin had lost the healthy glow that came from premium skincare, and the uniform transformed my entire bearing. For the first time in my adult life, I looked like someone whose opinions didn't matter, whose presence could be safely ignored. My first week at Grandmont revealed a complex social hierarchy among the staff that mirrored the class divisions among the members themselves. At the top were the senior staff, people like Thomas Bennett, the head concierge, who had worked at the club for 23 years. These were professionals who had made careers out of hospitality service and took pride in their expertise. Below them were department supervisors and specialized staff, with better pay and more stable schedules. At the bottom were people like me, part-time valet attendants, food service helpers, and general laborers. We were seen as temporary, replaceable, and largely invisible. The attitude toward us from both senior staff and members was often dismissive, as if we were necessary inconveniences rather than human beings deserving of basic respect. What struck me most was how this hierarchy was maintained not just by management, but by the staff themselves. Senior employees often treated newer workers with the same condescension they received from members, as if passing along mistreatment was an acceptable way to cope with their own lack of power. During my first 2 weeks, I began to understand the ecosystem of personalities that defined Grandmont's member culture. At the center was Marcus Thornfield, whose presence seemed to energize the worst impulses in everyone around him. When Marcus was at the club, other members became more demanding, staff became more nervous, and the entire atmosphere grew more tense. Marcus wasn't operating in isolation. He was surrounded by enablers who fed off his cruelty and amplified it. There was Patricia Vanderberg, whose art gallery served as a front for money laundering, but who presented herself as a sophisticated patron of culture. She had perfected the art of delivering cutting insults with a smile, particularly targeting female staff members whose appearance or service she deemed inadequate. Robert Harrison represented old money in decline. His family's real estate empire was crumbling, but he maintained the facade through increasingly desperate financial maneuvers. His cruelty towards staff stemmed from his own insecurity about his failing status, and he seemed to take particular pleasure in reminding working-class employees of their proper place in society. But the most important people I met weren't the wealthy members, they were my fellow employees. There was Maria Santos, a single mother working toward her nursing degree while supporting 2 children. David Kim, a recent engineering graduate working as a server while waiting for his immigration paperwork. Jennifer Martinez, the event coordinator whose creativity rivaled any executive I had worked with. These were intelligent, capable people who had been systematically taught that their role was to absorb abuse with a smile. I began to understand why my grandmother had been so concerned about the person I was becoming. This wasn't just about Marcus Thornfield, this was about an entire system that had taught wealthy people that their money made them fundamentally superior to everyone else. But what Marcus and his friends didn't realize was that they had just welcomed a wolf into their midst. For 6 months they would have unlimited opportunities to reveal their true characters to someone who had the power to destroy everything they cared about. To understand the full scope of what was about to unfold, you need to know exactly who Marcus Thornfield was and what he represented. On the surface, he appeared to be everything American capitalism promised to reward: intelligent, educated, successful, and wealthy. But beneath that polished exterior lay a cautionary tale about inherited privilege and moral decay. Marcus had been born into the kind of wealth that most people could only imagine. His great-grandfather, Edmund Thornfield, had built Thornfield Industries from nothing in the 1920s, starting with a small textile operation and expanding into manufacturing, real estate, and eventually technology. By the time Marcus inherited control of the company at age 32, it was worth over $800 million and employed nearly 15,000 people across 12 states. But where his great-grandfather had been a visionary who treated workers fairly and built lasting value, Marcus was a parasite who had inherited power without earning wisdom. He had attended Harvard Business School, not because of exceptional merit, but because of family donations totaling $50 million over 3 generations. His early career had been a series of positions where his family's influence, rather than his competence, had driven his advancement. When he finally took control of Thornfield Industries, the decline began almost immediately. He replaced experienced managers with yes-men who wouldn't challenge his decisions. He prioritized short-term profits over long-term sustainability, laying off thousands of workers while giving himself and his executive team massive bonuses. Most telling of all, he had moved the company's headquarters from the modest building where his great-grandfather had worked alongside employees to a gleaming downtown tower that cost $200 million and served primarily as a monument to his own ego. What made Marcus particularly dangerous was his ability to maintain the appearance of success, even as his company hemorrhaged value and credibility. He was a master of financial engineering, using complex debt structures, accounting tricks, and strategic partnerships to create the illusion of growth, while the core business slowly rotted from within. His personal lifestyle reflected the same hollow grandeur. The mansion he lived in had been built by his grandfather, but renovated at enormous expense to include features that served no purpose beyond displaying wealth. A wine cellar worth $2 million, a home theater that had cost more than most people's houses, a garage filled with exotic cars he rarely drove but loved to show off to visitors. What I observed during my first month at Grandmont was that Marcus's cruelty toward staff wasn't random or spontaneous, it was systematic and purposeful. He used humiliation as a tool to reinforce his own sense of superiority, particularly when he felt threatened or insecure. I noticed that his worst behavior typically occurred after business setbacks, or when he was in the presence of other wealthy individuals whose success might overshadow his own. His treatment of me was particularly calculated. He had identified me as someone he could safely abuse without consequences, a working-class woman with no connections, no power, and no recourse. Every humiliation he inflicted was designed to remind both of us of our respective places in his imagined hierarchy. But there was something else driving his behavior: genuine enjoyment. Marcus didn't just tolerate the discomfort he caused others, he fed off it. I watched his face during moments when he was publicly embarrassing someone, and I saw something that chilled me: pleasure. He derived emotional satisfaction from exercising power over vulnerable people, especially women he perceived as defenseless. Marcus's behavior wasn't occurring in isolation. It was supported and encouraged by a network of equally compromised individuals. Patricia van der Berg had built her reputation as a patron of the arts, while running what amounted to a sophisticated money laundering operation through her gallery. Her cruelty toward staff, particularly young women, stemmed from a deep insecurity about her own lack of legitimate accomplishment. Robert Harrison's real estate empire was collapsing due to his own incompetence. His treatment of working-class employees was his way of asserting superiority over people he secretly feared might be more capable than himself. James Crawford represented perhaps the most insidious form of wealth-enabled cruelty. His pharmaceutical company had made billions by pricing life-saving medications far beyond what patients could afford, literally profiting from human suffering. What made Marcus and his circle particularly dangerous wasn't just their individual moral failures, it was the way they had corrupted the institutions around them to enable and protect their behavior. They had created a bubble of impunity, where wealth provided immunity from criticism or accountability. But what they didn't realize was that their bubble was about to be penetrated by someone who understood their games better than they did, someone who had more wealth, more power, and more strategic thinking ability than any of them could imagine. Marcus Thornfield thought he was the apex predator, but he was about to discover that he was actually prey. My first direct confrontation with Marcus came during my second week at Grandmont, and it set the tone for everything that would follow. I was assigned to assist with golf cart maintenance when Marcus finished his round with his usual entourage. They had been drinking heavily, and their conversation had grown increasingly crude and dismissive toward the female staff. As they approached the clubhouse, Marcus noticed a small streak of dirt on the side of his cart, barely visible, unless you were looking for it. But Marcus wasn't really concerned about cleanliness. He was performing for his friends, demonstrating his power to humiliate someone without consequences. "Stone," he called out sharply, "get over here." I approached with the deference I had learned to project. "Yes, sir, Mr. Thornfield." He pointed at the streak with theatrical disgust. "What do you call this? Is this what passes for clean at this club now?" "I'm sorry, sir. I'll clean that right away," I replied, reaching for my cleaning supplies. "No," he said, his voice carrying a particularly condescending tone he seemed to reserve for women he considered beneath him. "You'll clean it properly, with your shirt." The demand was deliberately humiliating. He wanted me to ruin my uniform shirt, one of only two I owned as Alex Stone, to clean a mark that could easily be handled with appropriate materials. His friends chuckled appreciatively, understanding that they were witnessing a display of pure power over a defenseless young woman. As Alexandra Blackstone, I would never have tolerated such treatment for even a second. But as Alex Stone, I had no choice. I removed my outer shirt and carefully cleaned the dirt streak while Marcus and his friends watched with obvious amusement. "Much better," Marcus said with mock satisfaction. "Now you understand what real standards look like." The incident that truly revealed Marcus's character occurred 3 weeks later in the men's locker room area. I was restocking towels in the adjacent supply room when Marcus entered with Heinrich van der Berg, discussing a business deal. Rather than waiting for me to finish or simply asking me to step away, Marcus decided to make a point about his authority over female staff. "Alex," he called out, his voice carrying that familiar tone of condescending authority, "since you're here, you can help me with something." He proceeded to order me to organize his personal locker while he continued his conversation, treating me like a personal servant rather than a club employee. But what made the moment particularly grotesque was the way he narrated the process for Heinrich's benefit, explaining how these people needed to understand their proper role in society. "The problem with America today," Marcus pontificated while I organized his belongings, "is that we've forgotten the importance of natural hierarchies. People like Alex here used to understand their place. Now they think they're entitled to the same opportunities as their betters." But the incident that truly crystallized my understanding of Marcus's cruelty occurred during a busy Saturday evening in the main dining room. I was helping serve drinks at a private party when I accidentally brushed against Marcus's chair while reaching to fill Patricia van der Berg's glass. It was the slightest contact, barely noticeable, but Marcus seized on it as an opportunity for public theater. "Careful there, Alex," he said loudly. causing conversations around the table to pause. "I know you're not used to being around nice things, but try not to damage anything you can't afford to replace." The comment drew chuckles from some guests, but I could see others looking uncomfortable. Marcus, however, was just getting started. He began detailing my supposed financial situation for the entertainment of the entire table, speculating about my apartment, my car, my prospects for advancement. "The tragedy," he continued, warming to his theme, "is that Alex here probably thinks she's working towards something better, but the reality is that some people are simply meant to serve others. It's not cruel, it's natural order." What made the moment particularly grotesque was the way other guests responded. Some laughed along, caught up in the group dynamic. Others looked away, unwilling to participate, but also unwilling to defend me. The psychological impact was cumulative and deliberate. Each individual incident might seem minor, but together they created an atmosphere of constant anxiety and humiliation. By my 4th month at Grandmont, I had documented dozens of incidents involving Marcus and his circle, but more importantly, I had gained absolute moral clarity about what needed to happen next. Marcus's treatment of staff was destroying lives, and the systemic nature of the abuse made it clear that incremental change would never be sufficient. As I watched Marcus humiliate another young employee, I felt something shift inside me. The social experiment was complete. Now it was time for the real work to begin. The hunter had studied her prey long enough. What Marcus and his circle didn't realize was that every cruel word, every humiliating gesture, every display of casual indifference to human suffering, was being meticulously recorded and analyzed. As Alex Stone, I had access to conversations and behaviors that Alexandra Blackstone would never have witnessed. The wealthy elite felt completely free to reveal their true selves around someone they considered beneath notice, especially a young woman they assumed had no power or connections. My surveillance equipment, hidden in everything from my cheap jewelry to the buttons on my uniform, captured hours of incriminating material. But more valuable than the recordings were the insights I gained into how these people actually thought and operated when they believed no one important was watching. I learned that Marcus's cruelty wasn't just personal sadism, it was part of a broader business philosophy that treated human beings as disposable resources. During a private conversation with James Crawford in the club's cigar room, Marcus outlined his strategy for the upcoming quarter: massive layoffs disguised as efficiency improvements, pension fund raids justified as restructuring, and the closure of manufacturing facilities in communities that had depended on Thornfield Industries for generations. The key, Marcus explained, while puffing on a $500 Cuban cigar, is making it look like market forces rather than management decisions. People accept inevitability more easily than they accept deliberate choices. These weren't just wealthy individuals enjoying luxurious lifestyles. These were predators who had systematized the exploitation of vulnerable populations and turned it into a business model. But the most important education I received during those months came from my fellow employees, the people who bore the daily brunt of this systemic cruelty. Their stories revealed the true cost of the wealth and power that Marcus and his friends wielded so casually. Maria Santos's situation was particularly heartbreaking. She had been working toward her nursing degree for 3 years, taking classes at night, while supporting her 2 children and sending money to her elderly mother in El Salvador. The stress of Marcus's constant harassment had triggered panic attacks that interfered with her studies, and she was considering dropping out despite being only 6 months away from graduation. "I just can't handle it anymore," she confided to me during a break, her hands shaking as she tried to drink her coffee. "Every time I see his car pull up, my heart starts racing. He finds something wrong with my work every single day, no matter how carefully I do everything." What made her situation even more tragic was that she was an exceptional employee. Her attention to detail was flawless, her work ethic unmatched, but Marcus had identified her as vulnerable, a single mother, an immigrant, someone without connections, and had decided to make her life miserable purely for his own entertainment. David Kim's story was equally devastating. His engineering patents had the potential to revolutionize manufacturing processes, but his visa status made him completely dependent on maintaining steady employment. Marcus had discovered this vulnerability and used it ruthlessly, threatening to have David fired whenever he wanted to demonstrate his power. The longer I worked at Grandmont, the more I understood that the club wasn't just a place where wealthy people socialized, it was the nerve center of a network that extended far beyond its manicured grounds. During a quiet Thursday afternoon, I was cleaning behind the bar when Senator Richard Holbrooke arrived for a private meeting with Marcus and several other members. The environmental regulations are going to cost us about $200 million across our facilities, Marcus explained, pulling out documents. We need language in the infrastructure bill that creates exemptions for companies implementing innovative transition strategies. What struck me wasn't just the casual way they discussed buying legislation, it was how efficiently they had systematized the process. They weren't just corrupting individual politicians, they had created an entire infrastructure for converting wealth into political power. My position as an invisible servant also gave me access to confidential business information that would have been worth billions in the right hands. I learned that Thornfield Industries was in far worse financial condition than even I had suspected. The company was essentially operating as a Ponzi scheme, using revenue from new contracts to pay obligations from previous projects, while Marcus extracted massive compensation. More importantly, I gained detailed knowledge of how they planned to handle the inevitable collapse. Rather than taking responsibility, Marcus had developed an elaborate strategy to blame external factors while ensuring that he and his inner circle would walk away with their personal wealth intact. The plan involved transferring valuable assets to shell companies, declaring strategic bankruptcy to eliminate pension obligations, then emerging with a restructured company that maintained profits while abandoning costly obligations to workers and communities. It was a masterpiece of financial engineering designed to privatize profits while socializing losses, and it would destroy thousands of lives while making Marcus even wealthier than before. By my 5th month at Grandmont, I had gained something that no amount of wealth or education could have provided: absolute moral clarity about what needed to be done. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice. Marcus and his associates weren't just unpleasant people, they were actively evil individuals who caused measurable harm to everyone around them. The evidence I had gathered painted a picture of systematic exploitation that extended far beyond the country club. These people were destroying lives, corrupting institutions, and undermining the very foundations of democratic society, all while congratulating themselves on their success and superiority. But what gave me the most satisfaction was the knowledge that they had created the perfect conditions for their own downfall. Their arrogance had made them careless, their cruelty had given me motivation, and their systematic abuse of power had provided me with unshakable moral justification for what I was about to do. Marcus Thornfield thought he was untouchable because he had never encountered a woman with both the resources and the moral conviction necessary to challenge him effectively. He was about to learn that wealth without character was not strength, it was vulnerability waiting to be exploited by someone who understood the game better than he did. The announcement came during a regular Friday evening gathering in Grandmont's main lounge. Charles Morrison, the club's president, stood before the assembled members with barely contained excitement as he detailed the upcoming annual charity auction, the most prestigious social event on the club's calendar. "This year's auction will be our most spectacular yet," Morrison declared. "We've secured some truly extraordinary items, including a 1967 Ferrari 275 GTB in pristine condition, estimated to sell between $2 and $3 million. The room buzzed with appreciative murmurs. This wasn't just about charity, it was about displaying wealth, asserting social dominance, and engaging in the kind of competitive spending that served as sport among the ultra-wealthy. Marcus immediately positioned himself at the center of the conversation, his voice carrying over the others with practiced authority. "Finally, something worthy of serious collectors," he announced, his eyes already gleaming with anticipation. "It's been too long since we've had a proper auction piece." I was serving drinks during this announcement, moving invisibly through the crowd, as Marcus began holding court about his automotive knowledge and collecting experience. He regaled the group with stories about previous acquisitions, dropping names of famous previous owners, and emphasizing the investment potential of classic vehicles. "The key to automotive collecting," he pontificated while I refilled his scotch, "is understanding that you're not just buying transportation, you're acquiring history, craftsmanship, and most importantly, exclusivity. What he didn't say, but what everyone understood, was that the auction would serve as a very public display of financial prowess. The bidding wouldn't just be about acquiring beautiful objects, it would be about demonstrating who had the deepest pockets and the strongest nerve. Over the following weeks, Marcus's behavior toward staff reached new levels of intensity as he prepared for what he clearly saw as his moment of ultimate triumph. The charity auction had become his obsession, and his treatment of employees reflected his growing excitement about the upcoming opportunity to display his dominance. He began using me as a personal research assistant, ordering me to print articles about the Ferrari's history, previous sale prices of similar vehicles, and detailed specifications that he could memorize and regurgitate. But each task came with unnecessary humiliation, requiring me to hand-deliver documents during crowded dinner hours, making me wait while he read through materials before dismissing me with theatrical indifference. "Alex," he would call out loudly whenever I approached his table, "bring those papers here, and try not to get your fingerprints all over them. Some of us actually care about maintaining nice things." His friends encouraged this behavior, treating my humiliation as entertainment. Patricia Vanderberg began suggesting additional tasks for Marcus to assign me, each more demeaning than the last. But the worst part was watching how Marcus's anticipation of the auction seemed to amplify his cruelty toward all staff members, particularly the women. It was as if the prospect of public victory had awakened something even darker in his personality. The incident that finally triggered my decision to end the charade occurred exactly 1 week before the charity auction. Marcus had spent the afternoon drinking with his usual circle, celebrating some minor business success that he had inflated into a major triumph. By evening, he was drunk enough to drop his usual pretense of sophistication and reveal the raw ugliness that lay beneath his polished exterior. I was assigned to clean the private dining room where his group had been celebrating. The room was a disaster: spilled wine, food scattered across expensive furniture, broken glass from champagne flutes. As I worked to restore order, Marcus and his friends returned from the bar, their conversation loud and increasingly crude. "The problem with people like Alex," Marcus said, pointing at me as if I were an object rather than a person, "is that they don't understand their place in the natural order. They think they deserve the same opportunities as their betters." He walked over to where I was cleaning, standing uncomfortably close as he continued his drunken monologue. "Look at her, working so hard, so earnestly. She probably thinks that if she just tries hard enough, if she's just grateful enough, someday she might earn her way into our world." His friends laughed on cue, but there was something different about this moment. Marcus wasn't just performing for their entertainment, he was revealing something genuine about his worldview, something that went beyond casual cruelty into genuine malice. "The truth is," he continued, his voice dropping to a more intimate register that was somehow more menacing than his public announcements, "people like Alex exist to serve people like us. It's not cruel, it's biology. Some people are predators, and some people are prey." He leaned even closer, his breath reeking of expensive scotch, "And you, Alex, are definitely prey." That night, I made the final decision that would change everything. The charity auction would be perfect, exactly the kind of high-profile, ego-driven event where Marcus would feel most confident and untouchable. I pulled out my encrypted phone and made the call I had been planning for weeks. "This is Alexandra Blackstone," I said, when my assistant answered. "It's time to arrange delivery of the Phantom. By tomorrow night, I want every financial journalist in the city to know that something extraordinary is going to happen at the Grandmont Country Club charity auction." The stage was set. Marcus Thornfield thought he was about to claim victory in front of everyone who mattered to him. Instead, he was about to learn that there were forces in the world far more powerful than inherited money and social connections. The hunter was ready to reveal herself to her prey. The morning of the charity auction dawned crisp and clear. I arrived at Grandmont through the employee entrance at exactly 6 a.m., dressed in my usual uniform for the last time. The club was transformed, crystal chandeliers, polished to perfection, fresh flowers filling every corner, and the 1967 Ferrari positioned like a shrine to automotive perfection under carefully positioned spotlights. Marcus arrived early, moving through the ballroom like a conquering general, "Alex," he called when he spotted me arranging chairs. "Make sure those are perfectly aligned. Tonight is important and I won't have sloppy work reflecting poorly on the club's standards." I nodded with appropriate deference, but inwardly I was calculating. In exactly 12 hours, Marcus would be standing in this same room, experiencing the most profound humiliation of his privileged life. As the afternoon progressed, Marcus's behavior reached new heights of cruelty. The most egregious incident occurred when he decided my uniform wasn't properly pressed, a fabricated complaint designed purely to establish dominance in front of arriving guests. "This is unacceptable," he announced loudly. "How can we expect our guests to trust us with their vehicles when our staff can't even maintain basic grooming standards?" He ordered me to re-iron my shirt and apologize publicly for my unprofessional appearance. His audience chuckled appreciatively as Marcus basked in their approval, having no idea he was performing for the last time. At exactly 6:45 p.m., my custom Phantom Rolls-Royce pulled into the circular drive. The timing was perfect, late enough to ensure maximum attendance, early enough to create speculation. The midnight blue paint seemed to absorb and reflect light simultaneously, creating an almost otherworldly presence that immediately drew attention. Through the windows, I could see members stopping their conversations to stare. Even in a parking area filled with luxury cars, the Phantom commanded attention through sheer presence and undeniable quality. Marcus, who had been holding court near the auction display, noticed the commotion and moved toward the windows to investigate. "Whose car is that?" he asked, one of the valets. His voice carrying concern he tried to mask with casual curiosity. His discomfort was palpable. This was supposed to be his night, and the arrival of someone with obviously superior resources threatened to upstage his carefully planned demonstration of dominance. Inside the ballroom, the auction began with smaller items serving as warm-up acts. Marcus positioned himself prominently near the front, surrounded by his usual circle. His earlier confidence returned as he successfully bid on several minor items, each purchase accompanied by theatrical gestures designed to emphasize his financial superiority. "Ladies and gentlemen," the auctioneer announced as the evening reached its climax, "we now come to tonight's featured item, the magnificent 1967 Ferrari 275 GTB. Marcus straightened, his entire body shifting into predatory readiness. This was the moment he had been preparing for, the public demonstration that would cement his status among the club's elite. As the bidding climbed rapidly through the millions, Marcus remained calm and controlled. At $2.1 million, only 3 bidders remained active. At $2.2 million, Harrison dropped out. This left only Marcus and the mysterious bidder, setting up the direct confrontation that Marcus thrived on. Outside, my phone buzzed. "In position, ready when you are." I checked my watch 8:47 p.m. In exactly 3 minutes, I would step outside, reveal my true identity, and begin the systematic destruction of everything Marcus Thornfield believed about power, privilege, and his place in the world. The tension was palpable, as Marcus and the mysterious bidder engaged in their high-stakes duel. At $2.4 million, Marcus was sweating slightly, though he tried to maintain composure. This was significantly more than he had budgeted, but his ego wouldn't allow him to back down. $2.5 million. The unknown bidder called out calmly, his voice carrying authority that made several guests look more carefully. There was something familiar about him, but in the dim lighting, identification was difficult. Marcus hesitated for the first time all evening, but the public nature of the contest had activated every competitive instinct, and the thought of losing in front of his peers was unbearable. $2.6 million, Marcus announced, his voice slightly strained but still projecting confidence. The mystery bidder raised his hand with casual indifference. $2.7 million. A murmur ran through the crowd. Marcus's face had flushed red, whether from excitement, alcohol, or stress was impossible to tell. $2.8 million. Marcus called out, his voice now carrying desperation he couldn't quite mask. He was well beyond his planned budget, but stopping now would be a public admission of financial limitation. The mysterious bidder's response came without hesitation. $2.9 million. Marcus stood up ostensibly to get a better view, but really because sitting still had become impossible. His hands were clenched, and I could see the calculation in his eyes as he tried to determine how much higher he could go without risking financial ruin. $3 million, Marcus announced, his voice echoing through the silent ballroom. This was clearly his final offer, the absolute limit of what he could afford. 3.1 million, came the response, delivered with such casual indifference that it might as well have been a bid on a magazine subscription. Marcus went pale. The additional $100,000 wasn't just about money, it was about the message being sent. His opponent was demonstrating that Marcus's financial limits were merely stepping stones to someone with truly unlimited resources. Going once at 3.1 million, the auctioneer called out, looking directly at Marcus with professional sympathy. Marcus's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. He wanted to bid higher, needed to bid higher for the sake of his reputation, but the numbers simply didn't work. The silence was deafening. Marcus stood frozen, trapped between financial reality and social humiliation. Sold for $3.1 million to the gentleman in the back. As applause filled the room, Marcus remained standing by his chair, staring toward his mysterious opponent. Something about the man's posture triggered a memory he couldn't quite place. I was clearing glasses when Marcus grabbed my arm with unexpected force. His face was flushed with embarrassment and anger, and he needed someone to absorb the humiliation he was feeling. "This is your fault," he hissed. "If you hadn't been so slow with the service, if you'd kept my glass full, I would have been thinking more clearly. Your incompetence cost me that car." "I'm sorry, Mr. Thornfield," I replied with practiced humility. "Sorry isn't good enough," Marcus snapped, his voice rising. "Do you have any idea what that car meant to me? What this night was supposed to be?" Several guests were beginning to notice the confrontation, but rather than moderating his behavior, Marcus seemed encouraged by the attention. "You know what the problem is with people like you," Marcus continued, his voice now loud enough to draw stares. "You don't understand consequences. You think you can just drift through life, doing the minimum, never taking responsibility for how your failures affect your betters." I checked my watch, 8:57 p.m. In exactly 3 minutes, I would step outside as Alex Stone for the last time. When I returned, it would be as Alexandra Blackstone, and Marcus Thornfield's world would never be the same. "You're absolutely right, Mr. Thornfield," I said with perfect submission. "I should definitely face the consequences of my actions." I couldn't have agreed more. "If you'll excuse me, Mr. Thornfield," I said with practiced deference. "I need to retrieve something from the parking area. I'll be right back to help with the cleanup." Marcus waved me away dismissively, already turning back to his circle of friends who were offering hollow consolations about his auction loss. He was too absorbed in his own humiliation to pay attention to where I was going, or why. I walked calmly through the ballroom, past clusters of wealthy guests discussing the evening's dramatic bidding war. No one gave a second thought to Alex Stone stepping outside. I was just another invisible employee attending to some mundane task. But as I pushed through the main entrance doors, everything changed. I wasn't Alex Stone anymore. I was Alexandra Blackstone, and it was time to collect on 6 months of careful planning. My driver was waiting beside the phantom Rolls-Royce, holding open the rear door with professional precision. In the back seat lay a garment bag containing a $15,000 custom-tailored evening gown that would transform my appearance completely. But more importantly, there was a briefcase containing documents that would transform Marcus Thornfield's life even more dramatically. The physical transformation took less than 5 minutes, but the psychological shift was instantaneous. As I shed the cheap polyester uniform and donned the perfectly fitted designer gown, I felt the confidence and authority that came with being Alexandra Blackstone flow back into my posture and bearing. The difference was remarkable. Where Alex Stone had been deferential and apologetic, Alexandra Blackstone commanded attention through presence alone. My voice deepened, my stride lengthened, my entire energy changed from serving others to expecting service from them. When I walked back through the main entrance of Grandmont Country Club, the change in atmosphere was immediate and dramatic. Conversations paused mid-sentence as people tried to process what they were seeing. Several guests did double takes, their minds struggling to reconcile the elegant figure before them with some half-remembered glimpse of familiarity. The club's senior staff recognized the shift immediately. Thomas Bennett, the head concierge, hurried over with the kind of deferential attention reserved for the most important guests. "Miss Blackstone," he said, his voice carrying surprise and professional courtesy. "We weren't expecting you this evening. How may we assist you?" "Good evening, Thomas," I replied, my voice carrying the casual authority that came naturally when you controlled enough wealth to buy and sell most businesses. "I'm here to complete the transaction for the Ferrari I just purchased." The words rippled through the nearby crowd like electricity. Alexandra Blackstone, the mysterious billionaire, whose name was whispered in financial circles, but who rarely appeared at public events, had been the mystery bidder who had just outmaneuvered Marcus Thornfield in the most public way possible. Marcus was holding court near the bar, still nursing his wounded pride with expensive scotch, but the changing energy in the room gradually penetrated his bubble of self-pity. "Who's causing all the commotion?" he asked Robert Harrison, who was staring toward the entrance with growing confusion. "It's Alexandra Blackstone," Robert replied, his voice carrying awe he couldn't suppress. "The investment firm owner, she's the one who won the Ferrari." Marcus turned to look, and for a moment, his face showed only professional interest, but then something shifted. The posture, the way of moving, the subtle facial features that expensive grooming couldn't completely disguise. "That's impossible," Marcus said slowly, his voice carrying the first hint of confusion that would soon become terror. When I was about 10 feet away, our eyes met directly for the first time. In that instant, Marcus's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, denial, and finally dawning horror. "Good evening, Marcus," I said, my voice carrying just enough warmth to sound polite, while making it clear this was not a casual encounter. The blood drained from Marcus's face so quickly I thought he might faint. His champagne flute slipped from nerveless fingers, shattering on the marble floor. "Alex?" he whispered. "Actually," I replied with a slight smile, "it's Alexandra. Alexandra Blackstone, though I suppose you've known me as Alex Stone for the past 6 months." Word spread through the ballroom like wildfire. Within minutes, a crowd had formed around our group, guests craning their necks to witness what was clearly becoming the most dramatic social event in Grandmont's history. The whispered conversations were audible throughout the room. "That's really Alexandra Blackstone, the billionaire who never appears in public. She's been working here as a valet for 6 months." Marcus Thornfield had no idea who he was dealing with. Marcus stood frozen, his face cycling through expressions of shock, denial, and dawning terror. The man who had built his identity around publicly humiliating others was now experiencing that same humiliation magnified 1,000-fold. "This isn't possible," Marcus whispered. "You're Alex Stone. You're broke. You live in some tiny apartment and drive a piece of junk Honda." I smiled calmly, reaching into my evening bag to withdraw a business card, heavy stock with subtle gold embossing that announced serious wealth. "I do indeed drive a Honda Civic occasionally," I said. "Though I think you'll find my primary transportation somewhat more substantial." Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the phantom Rolls-Royce was clearly visible, its midnight blue paint gleaming like a sleeping predator. "For the past 6 months," I continued, my voice carrying easily to the growing crowd, "I've had the unique opportunity to observe how the wealthy elite behave when they think no one important is watching. It's been educational." I pulled out my phone and brought up a video file. "For instance, here's footage from last Tuesday, when you spent 15 minutes berating Maria Santos for arranging towels in a way that displeased you." Marcus's face went white as his own voice played. "The problem with these people is they don't understand the standards that civilized society expects." "Or this conversation from 3 weeks ago," I continued, swiping to another file, "where you detailed your company's strategy for eliminating pension obligations while maintaining executive bonuses." Patricia Vanderberg stepped backward, her face pale. "You recorded us? Without permission." "I documented public behavior in a public space," I replied smoothly, "perfectly legal, and utterly damning." "But the real revelation, Marcus," I continued, "isn't about your behavior towards staff, it's about your business practices." I withdrew a leather portfolio, opening it with deliberate care. While you've been focused on humiliating valets and servers, Blackstone Capital Management has been quietly acquiring your company's debt. Marcus's knees buckled slightly. What are you talking about? Thornfield Industries currently owes approximately $847 million across various financial instruments, I said, consulting the documents casually. As of this morning, Blackstone Capital controls 71% of those obligations. The math was simple enough for everyone to understand. I owned Marcus's company. I controlled his family's legacy. I held his financial future in my hands. What I want is very simple, I said, looking around the circle of faces. I want you to understand that actions have consequences, that wealth doesn't entitle you to treat other human beings as your personal entertainment. That respect is earned through character, not purchased through inheritance. I turned to address Marcus directly. You have a choice to make, Marcus. You can continue being the kind of person who derives pleasure from humiliating others, in which case I will exercise my financial options and you'll discover what it feels like to lose everything your family built. Or you can learn from this experience and become the kind of leader your great-grandfather was. Here's what's going to happen, I announced to the room. Thornfield Industries will implement immediate changes in workplace culture, employee compensation, and management practices. Maria Santos will receive a full scholarship to complete her nursing degree. David Kim will be hired as your new head of engineering at triple his current salary, and every employee you've mistreated will receive both formal apologies and financial compensation. Marcus finally found his voice, and if I refuse, I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Then by Monday morning, Thornfield Industries will be in bankruptcy proceedings. Your personal assets will be frozen pending investigation of corporate malfeasance, and everyone in this room will know exactly what kind of man you really are. The choice was his, but we both knew there was only one answer he could give. The silence stretched for an eternity before Marcus finally spoke. I accept your terms. The words seemed to physically pain him, but the alternative was complete financial ruin. His shoulders sagged as the arrogance that had defined his personality crumbled under consequences he had never imagined possible. Excellent, I replied, pulling out my phone. My legal team is standing by to draft the necessary agreements. Patricia van der Berg stepped forward hesitantly. Alexandra, Ms. Blackstone, what about the rest of us? Here's what's going to happen to each of you, I continued, addressing Marcus's enablers. Robert, your real estate empire is built on fraudulent lending practices. You have 30 days to liquidate your holdings and establish a compensation fund for displaced families. James, your pharmaceutical pricing strategies violate antitrust regulations. You'll be reducing medication costs by 80% across your entire product line. And Patricia, your options are simple: close your gallery and cooperate with federal investigators, or I'll ensure every major collector knows exactly what kind of operation you've been running. As the wealthy elite absorbed their new reality, I noticed Maria Santos and David Kim watching from the service area, their faces reflecting shock and hope. Maria, I called out, could you join us for a moment? She approached hesitantly, still in her housekeeping uniform, uncertain but recognizing that the power dynamic had shifted dramatically. Ladies and gentlemen, I announced, I'd like you to meet Maria Santos. Despite being one of the most competent employees here, she's been subjected to constant harassment from members who considered her beneath their notice. I turned to Marcus. I believe you owe Maria an apology, a public one. Marcus looked like he was swallowing broken glass. Maria, I'm sorry, my behavior toward you has been unacceptable. David Kim, I continued. Effective immediately, you'll be leaving your position here to become head of innovation at Thornfield Industries, with a starting salary of $180,000 per year and full visa sponsorship. I looked around the ballroom one final time. The old order in this room is finished. From now on, wealth comes with responsibility, power comes with accountability, and treating other human beings with dignity isn't optional, it's mandatory. The transformation was complete. Marcus Thornfield's reign of casual cruelty was over, and the people they had tormented were finally receiving justice. But individual accountability is only the first step, I announced to the stunned crowd. The real problem isn't just a few bad actors, it's the entire system that enables this behavior. I gestured toward the opulent ballroom. Grandmont Country Club has operated for decades as a fortress of privilege, where wealthy individuals felt free to abuse anyone they perceived as beneath them. That ends tonight. Charles Morrison, the club's president, stepped forward nervously. Miss Blackstone, surely you're not suggesting— I'm not suggesting anything, Charles. I'm announcing it. Effective immediately, this club will implement comprehensive staff protection policies, living wage requirements, and zero tolerance for member behavior that demeans employees. The murmur that rippled through the crowd was shock and indignation. For many of these people, the ability to treat service workers as lesser beings was integral to their identity. I've just purchased a controlling interest in Grandmont Holdings, I continued, pulling out a legal document. These changes aren't suggestions, they're requirements. As if summoned by dramatic timing, the main doors opened to admit financial journalists with cameras and recording equipment. They had arrived precisely on schedule. Ladies and gentlemen of the press, I said, acknowledging them with a slight nod. Perfect timing. You're witnessing the beginning of what I hope will be a broader transformation in how wealth and power operate in our society. Marcus turned pale as he realized this wasn't just private humiliation, this was going to be broadcast to the world. The Alexandra Blackstone Foundation is launching a nationwide initiative to combat workplace abuse and economic exploitation, I announced to the cameras. We'll be partnering with labor organizations and government agencies to identify and address systemic problems in how the wealthy elite treat working-class Americans. The documentation I've gathered will be shared with appropriate authorities, I continued. But more importantly, it will serve as the foundation for legislative reforms designed to protect working people from the kind of abuse I witnessed here. I looked directly at Marcus one final time. You spent months teaching me about the worst aspects of human nature. Now it's time for me to teach you about accountability. As I walked toward the exit, followed by journalists already crafting headlines about the billionaire who had gone undercover to expose elite cruelty, I felt the satisfaction that comes from justice served. The revolution had begun, and it was being broadcast live. 6 months later, the transformation was everything I had hoped for, and more. Thornfield Industries, under new management principles, had become a model for ethical business practices. Marcus, humbled by his experience, had discovered that treating employees with respect actually improved productivity and innovation. The company's stock price had risen 34% in 6 months. Maria Santos graduated from nursing school with honors and now worked at the city's premier medical center, her education fully funded by the Thornfield Employee Development Fund. David Kim's engineering innovations had already saved the company $12 million while creating 200 new manufacturing jobs. The ripple effects extended far beyond Grandmont. Robert Harrison's compensation fund had provided $67 million to families affected by predatory lending. James Crawford's pharmaceutical price reductions had made life-saving medications accessible to millions. Even Patricia van der Berg, after serving community service, had opened a legitimate gallery featuring work by underprivileged artists. Most remarkably, Marcus himself had undergone genuine transformation. The man who had once derived pleasure from humiliating others now spent weekends volunteering at homeless shelters and had established a foundation providing microloans to struggling small businesses. As I stood in my penthouse office, looking out over the city that had witnessed this extraordinary social experiment, I thought about my grandmother's words. The real test of a woman isn't how much she accumulates, it's how she treats people when she thinks no one important is watching. The Alexandra Blackstone Foundation had grown into a nationwide movement, with chapters in 12 cities documenting workplace abuse and advocating for systemic reform. The Grandmont protocols had been adopted by over 200 businesses nationwide. For the first time in years, I felt genuinely connected to the world around me. The social experiment had taught me that true power wasn't about controlling others, it was about lifting them up. Real wealth wasn't measured in dollars accumulated, but in lives improved. Marcus Thornfield had unknowingly become my teacher in the most important lesson of all, that treating people with dignity and respect wasn't just morally right, it was the foundation of everything worth building. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. Sometimes it's helping them become better people than they ever imagined they could be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.